President Arias of Costa Rica will answer your questions, and we're sorry we're late. We have until 10 after. President.
Mr. Arias, Mr. President, since the Guatemala Agreement does not address the presence of Cubans and Soviets in Nicaragua, do you think the United States should initiate bilateral negotiations with Nicaragua on these issues, which it considers important to its national security?
Well, it's not precisely true that the Guatemala Accord doesn't deal with Cuba and the Soviet Union. We, in the Guatemala Accord, recommend countries from this hemisphere and from other continents to suspend all aid to the rebel forces in the region. That includes the U.S. to the Contras in Nicaragua, and that includes Cuba and the Soviet Union to the guerrillas in El Salvador.
Should there be bilateral discussions, though, between the United States and Nicaragua?
Until now, the Sandinista government has invited the U.S. government to talk bilaterally on certain issues. I would say that if after the 7th of November, well, we are able to comply with the Guatemala Accord, and we are able to implement what we agreed on the 7th of August in Guatemala. There are some important points which have been left to be dealt in the Cantadora framework. I don't know if many people still trust Contadora. Then I would suggest that concerning disarmament, concerning the issue of military advisors, for instance, which should be dealt within Contadora, those topics could be arranged in a bilateral way between Nicaragua and the United States.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Are you convinced that the Reagan administration is genuinely interested in a diplomatic solution to troubles in Nicaragua?
Well, I don't think I should have any doubts about their support to my initiative at the very beginning. And now that beyond all expectations, an agreement was reached in Guatemala, and it is true that people were very pessimistic and very few believed that we were going to be able, the 5 Central American presidents, to reach an agreement. I think we deserve a chance. We deserve this opportunity until the 7th of November. And that's precisely what I have asked the Reagan administration in Washington, that before that date, the 7th of November, we shouldn't do anything so that any of the Central American countries could use a new excuse in order not to comply with what we agreed in Guatemala. And I just hope that they'll wait until the 7th of November, not only to ask for more aid to the Contras, but just to allow us to comply. We are doing all we can to comply, as you have seen.
President, what is your sense of how effectively compliance is being done in the 5 countries, especially in Nicaragua? Do you think that the November 7th deadline will meet compliance as you have set up in your report?
Well, yes, I am optimistic that we'll be able to comply before the 7th of November. But anyway, we have to have very clear in our minds what do we mean by compliance. For instance, what would happen if Nicaragua complies but not El Salvador? What would happen if El Salvador complies but Honduras is not able to get rid of the Contras in her territory? So we have, in a way, to be flexible. And that's why we propose in Guatemala that there should be a meeting of foreign ministers 1 month after the 7th of November, and again a meeting of the 5 presidents of the region 2 months after the 7th of November. Then we'll be able to judge if there has been a compliance in each country.
Mr. President, your peace pact calls for cessation of 8 insurgent groups. The Reagan administration fears that if several months down the road, it's apparent the Sandinistas won't comply with the provisions of the pact, that the Contras will be disintegrated by them because their U.S. aid will have been stopped. That would play into the hands of the Sandinistas. Do you feel that fear is justified, and if so, what do you think about it?
I think one of the most important points in the agenda for the next weeks is the negotiation of a ceasefire in Nicaragua as well as in El Salvador. My impression is that if we want, in a simultaneous way, to comply with the 5 major points that we agreed in Guatemala, the ceasefire should be perhaps the first priority. But this has to be a negotiated ceasefire, both in El Salvador and in Nicaragua. Costa Rica, my government, I personally want to mediate with the guerrillas in El Salvador and with President Napoleon Duarte. I have met the guerrillas in El Salvador, in Costa Rica, the Salvadoran guerrillas in Costa Rica twice. And I think that a dialogue could be started very soon. I have also written to Daniel Ortega, suggesting Cardinal Obando y Bravo as a mediator, because you are right, I think that a negotiated ceasefire is essential, is a priority. And unless there is a ceasefire, unless we put an end to the war, it's going to be very difficult to advance along the Guatemala Accord, trying to comply with the other points.
Mr. President, what is your best estimate? I know you don't like to look at it that way, but what is your best estimate of what will take place if the current peace plan unravels and isn't successful?
You see, that never happened. That is not in my mind. I mean, we have created so much expectations in 25 million of people in the region who want peace, who deserve peace, a better life, that I just can not imagine that the Guatemala Accord won't be successful. Well, if we fail, the end will continue, and the war will continue, and really nobody wants that. So I think we have a tremendous responsibility in our conscience. If there was a political will to reach an agreement in Guatemala, the 7th of August, I just hope that the same political will exist in order to comply with the Guatemala Accord. We were very aware, the 5 of us, of what we were signing there, of our pledges, of what were the implications of that accord. And I don't think we signed that in order to deceive the world and not to comply with what we agreed. So I am confident and I want to be optimistic.
Mr. President, one more question again pertaining to the Reagan administration's sincerity in this regard. Is it putting the pressure on your government and other governments behind the scenes in regard to this peace plan, maybe the holding up of some U.S. aid to your country?
No, no.
That's not happening?
No, that is not happening. No, that's not true. Let me just share with you the fact that it is true that the administration in Washington has some reservations on the Guatemala Accord. When I met President Reagan last June, he mentioned that he believed there were some loopholes in our agreement. And I recognize there might be some loopholes. I mean, it is not perfect. It was made by human beings, by myself, so I recognize it's not perfect. But this can be improved. And if there is good faith, and if there is a political will to comply, I don't see why all these loopholes, all these doubts, all these concerns can be dealt with. What really matters here is goodwill. Do we want peace? Do we want a negotiated solution to the conflicts in the region? Do we want to put an end to the war? Do we want a ceasefire? I mean, we are all convinced in the region that the future of Central America, if we want more economic and social development, depends on peace. And at the same time, we are also convinced that we won't be able to reach a durable peace unless there is democracy in the region. That is why the emphasis is, on one hand, on achieving a ceasefire as quickly as possible, putting an end to the war both in El Salvador and in Nicaragua, but on the other hand, we put a lot of pressure on the democratization of Nicaragua, as you all know.
Mr. President?
Could you elaborate on some of the loopholes that the Reagan administration has experienced?
Well, they claim there are no sanctions, but there were no sanctions in Vietnam. So if there is good faith, even with sanctions, I don't think we can have any guarantee that the accord will be successful. What is required is good faith and political will to comply.
You say no one in the region wants the war to continue. What evidence or assurances do you have that President Reagan agrees and does not want the war to continue in Nicaragua?
Well, the administration has used the contrast as a way of putting pressure on the Sandinistas to advance toward the promise they made to the OAS in 1979. And they consider, I think sincerely, that without that pressure, without the contrast, the Sandinistas will never democratize. My impression is just the opposite. My impression has been always that as long as you have the contrast will be used by the Sandinistas to make of Nicaragua a more dictatorial government. The contrast has been used as the excuse to abolish all individual liberties in Nicaragua. to close La Prensa and Radio Católica, etc. The contrasts have been the main excuse for the failure of the communist experiment in their economy, the Marxist experiment in their economy. So my argument is just the opposite. As long as Washington supports the contrasts, Washington will be isolated. There's no other country in Latin America who supports Washington on that. And that is why I propose the Arias Plan, or the Costa Rican Peace Initiative. Because now we have a chance, now we are given the opportunity to the Sandinistas without the contrasts, and according to a timetable, to prove their sincerity, to prove that if there are no contrasts, they'll try to fulfill the pledges made to the OAS in 1979. That is the main argument.
Mr. President, what's your reaction to President Ortega allowing La Prensa to reopen yesterday in Nicaragua?
Well, I think it's a very important and positive gesture. As you know, it was our foreign minister who arranged that, and I'm very pleased.
Was this done to give you more bargaining power in Washington? There's been some talk about that. Could you address that, please?
Sorry?
Some people say that you did this to give you more bargaining power in Washington. True or false?
False.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We need to get into this so that we can go over to the field.
All right.
Good morning. Another beautiful day in Kansas. Welcome to the 77th Landon Lecture on Public Issues. Before introducing our distinguished speaker, I want to introduce the other members of our platform party. On my right and on your left, we have U.S. Senator Nancy Kassenbaum. Well, I wasn't done yet. As you know, she was here less than 2 weeks ago to give the Landon Lecture on her father's 100th birthday. One of the most decent political leaders in America today. Let's give a real big hand to our friend and yours, U.S. Senator Nancy Kassenbaum. Nancy, thanks so much. Next to her is Edward Seaton, chairman of the Landon Patrons and publisher of the Manhattan Mercury. Ed? Next to Ed is Dr. Charles Reagan, my assistant and the chairman of the Landon Lecture Series. Chuck? On my left, on your right, is U.S. Senator, U.S. Representative Jim Slattery. Jim Slattery has played a very important role in the United States Congress, especially in the House of Representatives, for the development of a peace plan in Central America. And he gave us so much help to get the President of Costa Rica here today. Let's give another big hand to Congressman Jim Slattery. Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you. Next to him is Dr. John Keller, the Professor of Regional and Community Planning here at K-State and the President of our Faculty Senate. John? Next is Kent Bradley, who is a pre-medicine major, a Truman Scholar, and the President of the Kansas State University student body. Kent? We have a number of prominent individuals in the audience here today, and I know that we have many, many friends, but let me introduce some of them. Representing the governor of the state here today, Mike Hayden, and we're so happy to have him here, Lieutenant Governor Jack Walker. Jack, right over here. Also representing Governor Mike Hayden here today is Joe DeLatorre and his wife Carol. He's the public liaison for Mike Hayden. Joe? We also have a member of the Board of Regents here today, Norm Brandenbury and his wife Sally. Norm? The Executive Director of the Kansas Board of Regents, Stan Koplik, and his daughter Kirsten are here today. Stan? And then we have several state legislators here with us today, and if I could introduce them, and if you could just hold your applause until I finished introducing them. Jim Braden and his wife Marjorie. Jim is the Speaker of the House for the Kansas House of Representatives. The Majority Leader Joe Knopp and his wife Nancy. Well, let's give them both a big hand. Thanks so much. State Senator Merrill Wirtz and his wife Dorothy. There he is right there. And State Representative Gary Blumenthal. Gary? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a distinct honor for me and for all of us at Kansas State University to introduce to you today President Oscar Arias Sanchez, President of the Republic of Costa Rica. President Arias holds degrees in law and economics from the University of Costa Rica. He has a Master of Political Science degree from the London School of Economics, and he holds a doctorate in political science from the University of Essex in England. He is the author of 5 books and has published numerous articles in newspapers and national and professional journals. The President has been a professor of political science at the University of Costa Rica. He has been an advisor to the President of the Republic and a Minister for National Planning and Economic Policy. In February of 1978, he was elected to the Costa Rican legislature. In 1979, he was elected the General Secretary of the National Liberation Party. He was elected President of the Republic of Costa Rica in February of 1986. President Arias has been an international leader in the efforts to find a peaceful solution to the problems in Central America. He has drafted a peace plan appropriately called the Arias Plan, which in early August was accepted and signed by the presidents of all 5 Central American countries. Today, we are so happy to have the President here. Tomorrow, the President will address a joint session of the United States Congress and will be talking to the United Nations as well this week. Today, we are extremely pleased that President Arias is here at Kansas State University to address us on the topic, Peace in Central America. Please extend with me a warm welcome to a good friend of the United States of America and the President of Costa Rica, President Oscar Arias. Oscar? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
for thousands of youth in the future. At the inauguration of this series in 1966, Governor Landon spoke of the importance of an era of international relations that would shape the destiny of this world by creating a stability on which peace with security is ultimately based. This, said Governor Landon, must be our hope. This must be our aim. Over 20 years later, I could not have asked for a better introduction to my address to you today. Development and peace are inseparable. Underdevelopment and widespread poverty breed violence. Nothing undermines the struggle for development more than a threat to peace. The internal peace and external security of any nation depend upon that nation's capacity to produce and to distribute the basic needs of its citizens. A climate of war and violence destroys the fabric of society. For those who live and work in a poor society, it is even more difficult to create the conditions necessary for development. It is unfair that when these conditions exist, such as is the case of my own country, external threats present new obstacles to domestic growth. Costa Rica is struggling to improve its development in peace, but it is directly affected by a war waged by others. Therefore, as I have said many times, the problem of Central America are a part of Costa Rica's problems. But Costa Rica is not a part of the problem of Central America. For this reason, we believe that ending war in Central America is a moral and historical imperative. We are committed to fight for peace in the region. We believe that domestic tranquility and external security may be attained in our hemisphere only if freedom and democracy prevail in all of the countries. There can be no peace while the press is censored, while freedom of thought is stifled, while opposition groups are persecuted, while the pulpit is silenced, while the ballot box is violated, and while society is subjected to the arrogance of the bayonet. Because of these aberrations, dictatorships are obstacles to peace. We must promote change within those regimes. The same diplomatic pressure should be applied to bring about change in all of them. The reality and expectations of Latin America of 1987 are very different from what they were only 5 years ago. For the Latin American people, the most desired goal is that democracy may spread and thrive. We have paid dearly for authoritarian regimes, politically, socially, and economically. The fall of each despot has left in its wake suffering, torture, forced exile, and other abuses that have scarred deeply the face of the hemisphere. The economic crisis of the 1980s contributed, to some extent, to the fall of various dictators. But at the same time, this economic crisis has become one of the principal obstacles of the preservation of the secure democratic regimes. Those who were deprived of essential needs during dictatorships want their demands to be met immediately. Often, meeting the terms of their demands may not be realistic given the persistent economic crisis. But it is difficult to ask for more patience and sacrifice from those who suffered the political and economic consequences of dictatorships. No one who follows Latin America today can ignore the fact that democracies in the region have been forced to impose on their countries the most severe austerity measures known to modern economic history. Very often the restrictions are prescribed in the name of democracy, as if they were the necessary price to pay for the survival of freedom. The time period required for these economic measures to take effect is so long that hardships from the restrictions may jeopardize the stability of those democratic systems. Therefore, considering the actual economic conditions, it seems premature to talk of a new democratic era for Latin America. Given these adverse circumstances, it is likely that political parties and democratic institutions may deteriorate rapidly. This, if occurs, the door will be open to other political options which may include the return of traditional or even more totalitarian dictatorships. Every new president who assumes power in Latin America energetically calls for a new international economic order. Until now, very little has been achieved. What gains have transpired have favored only the most powerful countries in the region. International political support for the establishment of democratic regimes is not accompanied by the same goodwill in economic terms. This is made quite clear by the fact that some Latin American dictatorships enjoy more favorable international and economic treatment than many democracies. The coming years will be characterized in the political arena by the struggle to obtain adequate economic growth to ensure the survival of democracy. The industrialized world does not seem to share the dramatic importance of this perspective. When I assumed the office as President of Costa Rica, I spoke of the necessity to create an alliance to support freedom and democracy in the Americas. A democratic government is the only road to lead us out of poverty, dependence, and war. There should be no place in our hemisphere for tyranny because tyrants threaten peace and violate human rights. To speak of an alliance for freedom and democracy in the Americas also demands a different economic order. This new economic order should honor the political goal of freedom as the most important achievement, rather than emphasize short-term economic gains. Young democracies, therefore, should be granted preferential terms of international trade and external debt relief. The reality in Central America is that a dilemma between war and peace. This has a direct impact upon the political, economic, and social well-being of the people. Thousands of displaced families and thousands of refugees who have fled their homelands are the greatest testimony to this ongoing tragedy. The threat of an extended war exacerbates the political and economic uncertainties. While it is possible to speak of some countries in Latin America controlling military spending, most of the Central American nations are involved in an arms race. Some of our republics suffer from guerrilla warfare, which to some extent may be placed in context of the East-West confrontation. In the past, it was suggested that a special treatment should be given to Central America because of its relative level of underdevelopment. Today, we hear of the necessity of a special treatment in order to avoid war. Within this context, everyone seems to think that war is not only possible, but probable. Some think war is inevitable and necessary. Other think that it would be unjust, useless, and must be avoided. This crisis of war and peace, along with related social and economic problems, has led the international community to focus special attention on Central America. In theory, it is imperative to support economic growth in Central America. In practice, however, Central America is not receiving sufficient preferential treatment. There are no easy credit terms, few trade advantages, with the exception of the Caribbean Basin Initiative, and no special conditions for renegotiation of external debt. To the detriment of our countries, the international economic dialogue has lost its balance. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, private banks, and other organizations coordinate actions in order to impose conditions on our nations. This conditionality is sometimes too rigorous and is demanded with indifference to the political and social drama in which we live. These organizations often act as if they had no responsibility in history. Many years ago, development in Latin America was defined as following the road of the industrialized nations. This would be achieved through industrialization of our countries. We saw better prices for our products, greater access to credit under more favorable conditions, and ways to take advantage of technological advances. This new dialogue attempted to bring about a better understanding among nations, based on cooperation and the recognition that it is right that concessions be made to favor the poorer nations. Again, we made little progress. Today, the marketplace seems to be the principal instrument that determines relations between countries. Small and medium-sized nations are pressured to open their markets and to start protecting their small industries, all in the name of efficiency. This produces uncertainty and fear that the immediate consequence may be an increase in unemployment. That in itself may endanger the fragile social stability of many nations. This uncertainty is accentuated at the same time by the increasing protectionism of the developed nations. In addition, much has been said about the robotization, biotechnology, genetic engineering, as well as the revolution in plastics, synthetics, and production controlled by computers. Some industrialized countries have produced or are introducing these production methods which give them an additional advantage. Many Latin American nations are not prepared for this technological revolution. Thus, the future may lead to an even greater disparity between the nations of the North and the South if we are not adequately prepared to meet this challenge. In Costa Rica, we are committed to important changes in order to make our economy more efficient. We are looking for ways to increase the competitive nature of our products in international markets. We are looking for ways to improve significantly the productivity and efficiency of our resources. We saw better prices for our products, greater access to credit under more favorable conditions, and ways to take advantage of technological advances. This new dialogue attempted to bring about a better understanding among nations, based on cooperation and the recognition that it is right that concessions be made to favor the poorer nations. Again, we made little progress. Today, the marketplace seems to be the principal instrument that determines relations between countries. Small and medium-sized nations are pressured to open their markets and to start protecting their small industries, all in the name of efficiency. This produces uncertainty and fear that the immediate consequence may be an increase in unemployment. That in itself may endanger the fragile social stability of many nations. This uncertainty is accentuated at the same time by the increasing protectionism of the developed nations. In addition, much has been said about the robotization, biotechnology, genetic engineering, as well as the revolution in plastics, synthetics, and production controlled by computers. Some industrialized countries have produced or are introducing these production methods which give them an additional advantage. Many Latin American nations are not prepared for this technological revolution. Thus, the future may lead to an even greater disparity between the nations of the North and the South if we are not adequately prepared to meet this challenge. In Costa Rica, we are committed to important changes in order to make our economy more efficient. We are looking for ways to increase the competitive nature of our products in international markets. We are looking for ways to improve significantly the productivity and efficiency of our resources. We want to promote growth based on our own efforts because we want to be responsible members of the world economy. We are committed to follow our own path that allows us to preserve and to strengthen the historical achievements of our own social development and our democracy. We are proud to be a country without an army, a country where dialogue prevails over violence, a country where basic needs of the less fortunate have priority over the demands of the more privileged. These commitments to economic growth and social justice do not contradict each other, as has often been stated. Rather, they express a responsible view of what constitutes development. We will build a modern economy based on the economy that we have, not in its ashes. We support small producers. We are converting all state enterprises into cooperatives. We believe that in order to strengthen our democracy, to ensure its survival, we must create more proprietors, not more proletariat. As I have said earlier, this entire effort will be useless if we permit violence and war to continue throughout Central America. In August of this year, the 5 Central American nations signed a peace agreement. We are convinced that no matter how high the risk of fighting for peace, the cost will always be less than that of war. The plan for peace signed in Guatemala proposes national reconciliation where brothers are killing brothers. We seek dialogue and we are asking for amnesty. We want a ceasefire as soon as possible. We are asking that democratization be achieved within a fixed time period. We are proposing free elections that will reflect the true will of the majority of the people. We demand that all foreign powers suspend military aid to the regular forces in the region. We seek guarantees that no nation will allow its territory to be used to attack another nation. We want a reduction of arms in the region. We are asking for national and international supervision from the Contadora Group, the Support Group, and the Secretary Generals of the United Nations and the Organization of American States. We have proposed guidelines to evaluate progress toward achieving peace. We are convinced that with democracy and freedom we may restore development that will permit us to enjoy true and lasting peace. This view reflects years of work of the Contadora Group, and emerge from a century of democracy and freedom in Costa Rica. By signing the agreement in Guatemala, we have taken a step in good faith toward a commitment to work for peace. We have set deadlines, and above all, we have established common goals. Some goals we will achieve sooner than others. Some will take longer. We will not fall into a trap set by someone who shows us a calendar every day, anxious to bury the last hope, anxious to close the last door. It is possible that reason may prevail in Central America and then dialogue and reconciliation may be established. I recognize that the forces we are trying to overcome are very powerful. I know that it is easier to predict defeat. I also know that everything we have accomplished may be easily destroyed. I have taken the Costa Rican way. The greater the obstacle, the harder we have to work with great imagination to overcome it. We are a country without arms and without soldiers. We do not want and will not support war. This is something we will never do. My dear friends, we are facing difficult times. We are facing difficult challenges. We must make peace and put an end to the hatred that reflects many decades of poverty and desperation. We must construct a new economy without delay. Without economic growth, we will not be able to attain social justice that millions of Central Americans desperately demand. Democracies of the world should be united on the road to peace. Free nations must work together. We must not be afraid of freedom. This is an historical moment. How the pages of history are written depends upon us. Let those pages of history be written about reconciliation and dialogue, and not about destruction and death. I'm convinced that despite the enormous difficulties that lie ahead, we can change the course of events in Central America toward peace. The next chapter of history has yet to be written. We are obligated to write it ourselves. I know that together we may write about peace and development. There is no one better than you, the young men and women of this powerful democratic nation, who may comprehend the necessity to work for peace now. There is no time to lose. I invite you to help us write the next chapter in the history of Central America. History is ours to write. Thank you.
The President had a press conference this morning at 9:30. He also will be answering questions from students at 3 o'clock in the Little Theater of the Kansas State University Union. We certainly are happy that so many people from around Kansas and here at Kansas State University could come here this morning to hear this very, very important lecture that has so much to do with not only peace for Central America, but peace for the world in the months and years ahead. So we're very, very happy that